Welcome to another episode of the Mapscaping podcast. My name is Daniel and this is a podcast for the geospatial community. A guest on the show today is Priscilla Cole, and she's sharing her journey from analyst to engineer and what she did when she discovered that her ambitions were bigger than the tools that she was using. Over the years, I've published quite a few episodes sort of focusing on careers in geospatial, so I'll put links to those in the show notes because I think they'll complement this episode. Okay, that's it for me. Let's hear from Priscilla. Let's find out what she did when she discovered that her ambitions were bigger than the tools that she was using. Hi Priscilla, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here. Today we're going to be talking about your journey from being a geospatial GIS analyst to an engineer, and hopefully we'll shed a bit of light on what other people can do if they want to follow in your footsteps. But when I asked you earlier for your title, how should I describe you? How should I introduce you? You said something like, I'm an analyst, I'm a data engineer, I'm a data scientist, and I think you said like 5 or 6 other sort of buzzwords. And I was trying to imagine the Venn diagram of all of that stuff and put it together. And it's kind of difficult to come up with a box that I could put you in. Hopefully some of this will come out in the conversation that we're about to have. And I guess the point I wanted to highlight for the listeners here is that you're a lot of different things. But today we're going to be talking about your journey from GIS analyst to engineer. Whew, big introduction, I know. Welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here. Perhaps you could just briefly introduce yourself to the listeners, please.
Yeah, I'm Priscilla Cole. I'm based in New York City. I've jumped into a lot of different verticals and types of analysis, and I love data. I love spatial data. I love solving great big problems that have to do with natural disasters and water and where people are going to live and climate and all of this. But, it all really comes back to like being able to look at data and analyze data and figure out how to meld it into all of those purposes.
Yeah, and geospatial is a big part of that kind of stuff. How did you get into GIS? I remember in a previous conversation you were talking about you kind of fell into it. You didn't know it existed, and someone said, "Hey, look at this." Can you walk me through that, please?
Yeah, so I started off as a biology major and really focused in ecology, which I think of now as being inherently spatial in nature. You're looking at habitats and species distributions and natural resources and, the interplay of all these things. But geospatial was not part of any of that education, which is kind of unfortunate. And then later, I went to grad school in an interdisciplinary master's degree where I was combining policy and water resources topics, and there was some economics and strategy and things like that incorporated into it. And one day I met another student who had maps on his computer screen, and he was zooming in and out, and he was looking at corn in the Midwest, some data from USDA. And I was like, what is that? Tell me about this thing. Like, I've never seen anything like that with data up on a screen. And he said, yeah, you should really take a GIS course here. And, there's other things too, like remote sensing. You might really enjoy that. And he knew that I was into, water resources. And like, yeah, that's really applicable to water resources. So I took one GIS class in grad school, and it was an Esri-based class. So I got into ArcMap and all of that. And I took remote sensing and learned all about these different, things that you could see from space or from airplanes and how that was being applied to pollution and agriculture and policy and all sorts of things. But yeah, I really only took those 2 classes in grad school, and it was all because of this friend who said, hey, you should really do this.
Yeah, it's all because you saw some maps on a computer screen and thought, wow, this is interesting. And maybe I could use that. Just out of curiosity, what did you think after those 2 classes? Were you like, yes, this is it, this is for me? Or, wow, this is too difficult, I'm not into it. What were you can you remember what your initial sort of thoughts were?
Yeah, at the time, well, and it might even be true a little bit now, but the geospatial software that I used in the computer lab as a student was really clunky, and it collapsed all the time, and the network went down and computers blue screened, and it was really difficult, trying to do all this data management, and I had no background in that before. And I really enjoyed the projects that I worked on, but it was so much work. And it's interesting because as much as I liked it, I actually didn't incorporate any geospatial into my thesis at all. Like it didn't even occur to me like how I could use that in my thesis around water resources. So yeah, really into it, but I still wasn't sure what to do with it yet.
So in my notes in front of me here, I've got drinking the Kool-Aid hard. This is one of the notes I made for myself. And this is referring to, a previous conversation we had preparing for this interview. And you talked about getting a certification in Esri and even a GIS professional certification. How did you get from like not including GIS, geospatial in your thesis at all to those things? What happened?
Yeah, so in grad school, I picked up an internship at an estuary program, working again on water resources, and that turned into a fellowship, turned into a full-time job. And at that workplace, there was one GIS license, like an Esri license there, that somebody had written a grant for to get it. And when I came on staff, they said, okay, if you want to use this, you also have to take over the technology grants and, write grants to like sustain this license. So I had to do this renewal every year. And in that grant, I started reading it more and I was like, whoa, I can get classes for free. I can get books for free. I can get myself to, this Esri International User Conference in San Diego every year, and I could get that for free. And so while I was managing that technology grant, I milked it for everything it was worth. And I maxed out the classes allowed and I got all the books and I attended conferences for years. Yeah, and that's right. I drank the Esri Kool-Aid really hard. And then, took that path all the way to certification. At that time, Esri had just released these new certification programs. So I have a certification as a desktop analyst, like certified desktop analyst in Esri products.
And you also have a certification as a GIS professional. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. And then I learned about the GISP and realized that, wow, like it took a lot to get that. I mean, I did the math at some point. Like basically you have to either be 5 years as a rock star in GIS or like 10 years of kind of playing at it to get there. And so it motivated me looking at all the education and experience requirements to just keep building my resume and to keep working out more and more and to keep, presenting at conferences and picking all this up in order to get that. And I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with it, but it seemed like a good thing to do. Like it could open up career opportunities for me.
Yeah. So about motivation, what was motivating you? Obviously, you getting this certification, this GISP certification was motivating. I need to do this, this, and this if I want to get there. Was there like career-based sort of motivation as well? And when I say that, I mean like, oh, this is going to help me out in my day-to-day job. This is why I'm taking these classes, or this is going to be where I want to get to in my future career. So I'm going to take these classes, or the employers are asking for these 7 things.
Yeah. So for me, working at the estuary program, I was there as some hybrid of like analyst on the science team. Sometimes I was helping to collect information. And then I was often the person that would, come back and process the data and churn out analyses and help to prep things for papers and conferences and things like that. And so as soon as I was learning these skills in geospatial and analysis, I was applying them immediately. Like I would bring them into my work and, I would use these skills to do harder and harder things and to answer bigger problems. And, eventually it was pulling in, we had vector data and roster data, and we had all this data that was coming in from the field staff, and we had LiDAR data. And it was just, like the world was my oyster to be able to crack into this and ask really hard questions and do that analysis for our team.
So yeah, the world was your oyster. Why move away from that? Because this is your analysis journey of your career. That you were, I guess, using Esri products. You were, using desktop software. That's my guess anyway. Why move away from that? What was the motivation to move into engineering, like learning how to program?
Yeah. So at some point, I hit a really hard wall. Talking about all these different data sources that I was bringing in. In Esri products, you can do some data engineering, some data manipulation. It's not great, but our data was all over the place. It was on servers. There was no semblance of a database. Everything was scattered and messy. And I realized that I didn't have some of the basic tools that I needed to, wrangle the data into one place and reshape it and, like look at data over time. Or, if you're bringing in these bigger data sets, like from satellites or or LiDAR, like it just gets so big so fast. And I really tapped out the abilities that I could process these things with the out of the box tools from Esri. And so that led me to a desire to want to learn SQL and learn about databases and constructions and architecture of database designs and Python, to help extend the tool sets that I had. Because I often had ambitions a lot bigger than the tools that were in front of me.
I think that's a really great way of putting it. I think I know the answer to this, but I'd love to hear your response. Why SQL and why Python?
Why SQL and why Python? So one of the conferences that I went to, one of the many Esri conferences, they made this grand announcement of like, oh, Python is easier than ever in Esri products. And there's this new library called ArcPy, and they pushed it really, really hard. I forget which year that was. And SQL was already one of those languages that was like a light version of SQL that was kind of baked in to Esri. And so initially my thought behind those languages was just like, well, this will help me to use the software better. This will help me to extend the tooling of the software. I knew that SQL was the language of the database world. And so they seemed like the natural languages to learn.
Yeah, and as you say, like some of these things there was light versions of these things being built into Esri products. I remember using ArcPy as well. And I remember when you create filters, at least back in the day, you could do that in sort of a light version of SQL as well. And I think that's probably where I would have started, or actually that is probably where I started as well. Think, oh, I've done just a little bit of this before. Perhaps I could extend these skills. And it just seemed easier than jumping off it and trying to learn something completely new, like doing some things I was already doing, just sort of diving deeper into it. How did you go about learning this? Did you just teach yourself? Did you take any courses? How did you do it?
Yeah. So, I took an ArcPy class through one of those many classes that I wrote into the grant for myself. But then I also just reached out wherever I could. I bought books with various titles like Teach Yourself SQL and 20 Easy Steps that only takes how many hours? I bought the O'Reilly Python Bible book. It's like super thick, and worked through all these different tutorials and exercises. It was really scrapped together by things that I could get my hands on.
Yeah, I remember doing that. I remember a online course called Python in 30 Days or something, or Python in 48 Painful Steps. And I think I brought a Python for Dummies book as well, which was actually really, really helpful just to get started with it. Have you got any qualifications in these things? So, earlier we talked about you're really into Esri products. You could see a future working with a software. So you went out and got certified as a Esri desktop analyst and also as a GIS professional. When it came to programming, coding, did you also sort of look to get certifications?
One of the things that I did, I purchased a class bundle through a Groupon, which is like this discount pricing website of a Microsoft T-SQL training package and worked my way all the way through it and answered all the quizzes. And, they give you a little certification that you can print out at the end. I don't know how official that is, but I worked all the way through that. During the pandemic, I needed an activity to keep my sanity when we were in lockdown. So I enrolled myself in a Codecademy data science professional course. And that took, I probably spent about an hour or two a day locked in a room during the pandemic, working on these exercises and, working on things like SQL and Python and statistics and what else was in there? Machine learning and natural language processing. And there were lots of different projects that we had to do, like working with data, cleaning up data was a big part of it. And so, yeah, I worked my way all the way through that and got a certification from Codecademy as well that took a few months to complete.
This is going to sound like a really harsh question, but do you think anyone cares about that certification? So do you include it on your CV if you're applying for jobs? Do you say, hey, I've got the certification?
It was something to talk about when I was going through some interview processes, I was saying like, hey, I did all of this. I could talk about the work that I did. I quickly came back and tried to apply some of those things and build out models with data that I had access to. So like it was more than just the coursework. In order to renew my GISP, I also have to report all the activities I've done and, how long they took and put screenshots in of any, certifications or things. So it's helpful for that, at least, to renew the GISP.
Yeah. And you also talked about learning on the job. So you were applying these things in your day job. Did it always go well? Did you make any mistakes?
Yeah, after I left the estuary program, I moved to New York City and I had such a craving to work at a place that had enterprise level databases and they had real DBAs and seasoned analysts and so forth. And I got a job, New York City Department of Environmental Protection, which is essentially the water and sewer department. And they hired a whole bunch of analysts and technology people following Hurricane Sandy to make sure that the city was in better shape to handle, flooding disasters and hurricane related events. So anyway, I came on staff there and I was super nervous because I felt like I was joining this very official season, like well-oiled machine, of all these people. And I studied a lot before I started. I was like, man, I really got to crack the books on Python and SQL and make sure that I can keep up with these people. But then when I started, it was so interesting because a lot of the work that was being done was very manual and very inefficient. And there were these processes where everything had to stop and all the analysts had to be on working full time, just processing these things by hand. It would take like a week out of our regularly scheduled work. And I looked around and I was like, you know what? This is so inefficient. Like, we can clean this up a lot with Python. Like, we can, automate a lot of these workflows. So I got permission to work on one of these things because everybody hated this work anyway. It's not like this was anybody's joy. Like, everybody hated this, and my boss said, yeah, sure. If you could get rid of this awful task, that would be great. So I started trying to work on Python tooling, which quickly ran into some issues because our network was slow and buggy. And, like my first iteration was like hitting the network over and over. I crashed our network on a couple of occasions and had, the deputy commissioner like march over to my desk, like, are you the analyst that took down the network? I'm like, sorry, promise never to do it again. But it was really interesting working on that because I learned the hard way a lot of really practical like design practices. And I guess you would call it almost like software engineering practices of like, how to reduce traffic on the network and, how much you could hold in memory versus how much you could put on disk and, kind of the handshake between these different things. And, once getting over that low bar of don't crash the network, then thinking about how to take it a step farther to make it faster and more efficient and, easier to use for the analysts that were eventually consuming these tools that I built.
This sounds a lot like data engineering to me. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's interesting. And now there's this popular title that I see a lot that's like analytics engineering. And I think that's a lot of what I was doing. Like, I was automating workflows. A lot of it had to do with like data pipelines. A lot of it is really getting the data into shape and into the right place so that it's where it's needed by the analysts that are going to work on it, because there's just so much work in that, like grabbing data from all different systems and APIs and, like patching that all together so that it's in the right place and ready for use.
When I was learning Python, I found it difficult to pick good tasks to automate, if that makes sense. I had to pick a lot of different tasks and sort of work away and go, oh, this is actually not a great task to automate because we're not actually spending that much time on it, or it's really difficult, or I'm going to create something here that no one else can maintain or run. And I found it difficult to figure out good tasks to automate. Did you have a similar problem, or did you just automate everything?
No, what's interesting? I kind of think of myself sometimes as almost being like a therapist for other analysts and engineers. Well, the engineers that I worked with at DP were all civil engineers. I should say that, where I would, either sit with them and, see what they were working on and like really feel their pain. Like, where are your pain points? Like, where are those things that are causing the bottlenecks that are preventing you from being able to do your job or being able to do it in a timely manner? Or like, what are these things that you really want to do, but like you just don't have the resources or the tools that will allow you to do it? And, by taking that more I guess, intuitive approach of like follow the pain, I've found that this has led me to right into, some of these great things to build and design that are really helpful because, if you start off by like, let's help solve your problem, like maybe they don't even have the requirements laid out. Like they can't even really articulate what it is. They can just show you like how frustrated they get when they're trying to do this, and then you go back to the drawing board and figure out like what a solution looks like to address that.
Did you ask for permission or forgiveness? So you sat with someone and said, oh, this is the thing that I'm finding really painful. This is the thing that I'm struggling with. And you looked at that and said, I can automate that. I can take that pain away. Did you go and ask for permission to work on that thing, or did you ask for forgiveness for having worked on the thing?
Yeah, in the beginning of my time at DEP, it felt a little bit more like asking for forgiveness. Like I kind of worked on it, timidly asked my boss, like, can I have some extra time to work on this? Like, I promise I'll get all my other stuff done. I'll work on it at the side, kind of like tiptoeing around and trying to find space to do it. But then after a couple of successes, it really launched a new phase of my career at DEP where I started to be sought out by the civil engineering teams, and even the director of engineering would pull me into pet projects to work with the engineers and to develop tools and analysis. Yeah, and I really developed kind of a niche in that, and it's not at all what I was hired for. I was hired just to be an analyst, just to make maps, just to show like, okay, post a pipe collapsing or something, like what's the outage area for the community. And then it really evolved into kind of this more like tool making and data engineering role.
What would you say to someone is in the same situation as you were? They've hit the wall, that they want to do more, they can see more opportunities here, and they're learning Python and SQL anyway because they're using it in whatever software they're using. But they know there's more here. What would you say to those people? How would you or what recommendations would you make?
Yeah, what recommendations would I make to them? You really don't have to be bound by your title or what you were hired to do. That's one recommendation. And, the world is so open today in terms of all sorts of trainings. I mean, all the time I want to know how to do something. I go to YouTube and I watch a quick tutorial and I've gained this new skill that I apply. And, things are so fluid and you don't have to be intimidated. Code takes a little bit to learn, but it's not impossible. And, you can come from some completely different background and not think that code is applicable, but it can be so, so helpful. You can shape the career that you want. Like, you don't have to wait for anybody to assign it to you or, say like, okay, you're good enough. Now you can graduate into this. Like, no, you can start doing some of those things right now, today.
I'm really pleased you said that. I hate this idea of people out there waiting to be picked, waiting for someone else to say, yeah, you're good enough, that you can evolve in your career. Yes, it's time for you to try something new, or yes, you can do this. I hate that idea. All those people just sitting there waiting for someone else to recognize them instead of like putting themselves forward and trying things. And I would also mention that large language models, at least in my mind, have really changed the way you can write code and learn it as well. Do you use that in when you're in your day-to-day work, or have you had any experience using large language models to help you write code or debug code?
Yeah, I use them some. I should probably use it a lot more. I mean, there's definitely the times where, you can throw in data and say, I want this. Like if it's something fairly straightforward, like I just did this the other day. I wanted to make a quick graph in Matplotlib in Python, and I was struggling to get the columns side by side, and it's just like, oh, okay, here, let me ask ChatGPT how to do this. And it did it, it like pumped out some code that I could grab and use. Yeah, and it's interesting because, there's a lot of hype right now around large language models. And I do think that some of the hype is justified. I mean, I do think that in the future, more and more of these things will be incorporated and will make things easier. I've also seen where ChatGPT and other things hallucinate fantastically. With like newer packages and things like recently I was trying to flip something from a pandas data frame to a polars data frame, and it asked to, like, okay, how do you translate this into polars? And just made up like several methods in a row that didn't exist. Just total garbage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking more, I guess, when you're learning to code, at least this was my experience when I was learning to code, debugging. I spent 99% of my time debugging the code that I'd just written. Why is it not working? What is this stack trace? I don't understand what's going on. Taking that chunk of code and pasting it into ChatGPT or whatever and saying, why is this not working? And I've done this recently for little pieces of work that I've needed to automate, and it's been fantastically helpful. And I could imagine if you were learning, this would be a great way of starting, of getting that sort of instant feedback. I'm not suggesting it's the only way or the silver bullet, but anything I think that can get people moving forward, feeling like they're making progress, like they're learning, I think is really, really important and helpful.
Yeah, I saw a YouTube video recently of somebody using ChatGPT to design a syllabus for not even like a syllabus. Like, I want to learn Python applied to spatial data. What should I learn and what order should I learn it? Like recommending different tutorials or like, skills to build up. And that would have been really helpful for me when I was learning, instead of just going to the bookstore and buying anything that had Python in the title.
Yeah.
It would have been really helpful to have had, something like that could do that research and pull it together. And, like you said, debugging code. Absolutely. I mean, I know that people find great efficiencies in doing that and so forth.
If I had to summarize your journey up until now, the bits that we've been talking about, and say you fell into GIS, you saw some cool maps on a computer screen, like, yeah, that's for me. Then you jumped down the Esri rabbit hole and you got certified in everything you could possibly get certified in, took every course you could. You even went and got your GISP, became a GIS professional. And then you hit the wall. Data is big and messy, and I actually need to learn how to manipulate it outside of these tools. They're restricting what is possible. And so you went off and learned SQL and Python, things that you were already using little snippets of in your day-to-day work. You're self-taught, and you did a lot of on-the-job learning by the sounds of things. You had a few mistakes on the way, and you ended up sort of crafting your own job. Like, you weren't hired to be what I'd perhaps describe as a data engineer, but you ended up doing data engineering because you figured it out. You learned along the way. Would you call yourself a data engineer today? If you were applying for a new job, would you say, hey, I'm a data engineer? And what would you point at to sort of prove that you are?
Yeah. So after leaving the public sector, I moved to an insurance company where there were a bunch of data scientists and data engineers on staff already. And I was hired in for my geospatial skills, and also because they felt like I could talk to these other groups and I understood the languages and I understood the skill sets. And they were hoping that I would come on staff and bridge the gap and also bring in geospatial data into the workflows and processes. So that's exactly what I did. And I sat somewhere between data science and data engineering. And it wasn't my job to teach people data or geospatial data. It was my job to figure out how to incorporate geospatial data into, the data science workflows, into these data engineering pipelines, and bring it in and enrich the data sets that they were already using and the analysis that they were already doing. And to do it in a way that was almost kind of sneaky so that they didn't even know how it was happening. And to use spatial as a join key to pull different data sets together. And it worked like magic as far as they knew. They were like, I don't know where this data is coming from, but it's great. It gives us the ability to, see so many more things and analyze stuff in a different way.
So for me, if I was in that position, I think imposter syndrome would kick in pretty quickly. And the idea of standing in a room with a bunch of, quote unquote, real qualified data scientists, I'd be thinking, shit, do I belong here? Do I fit in? Can I sort of match their skill level? Did you have any of those sort of feelings of self-doubt taking that job?
I was so excited to take the job. I was so excited. And I felt like I had made it. I had crossed over into the private sector. I was, making more money. And I got to sit with people who had fantastic skills and were so smart. And for me, it was like writing in the free courses and the grants that I used to write. Like I had all these people I could just ask all these questions. And fortunately, the team that I joined was really welcoming and invited, practices like code pairing and code reviews and skill sharing. And, we organized brown bags and things of that nature. And everyone was someone for me to partner with. Everyone was someone for me to learn from. And I loved every minute of, like meeting with these people and getting to build some really cool stuff, and getting to meet, even some of the people on the infrastructure team that I would tell them this challenge, like I have data here, it's this big, I need to get it over here because we need to analyze it and then we need to pull it over here. And they'd be like, okay, all right, let's build some network tunnels. like, like let's solve this thing. Yeah, it was wonderful.
Having been through this sort of whole process of moving from GIS analyst to geospatial engineer, software engineer, what does the future look like for you now? What is the dream job or the dream career move from here?
Yeah. So when I left the insurance company that I worked for, I went to work for a data company, like a data provider that sold data to insurance companies and civilian governments and so forth. The company is ISI, that you could see, natural catastrophes from space and, sea flood and sea fire and make use of that data. I got really sold on that idea of like, when you're writing these portfolios for insurance or finance that have a global reach, like you really need these global data sets to bring in. And, I learned about remote sensing all the way back in grad school, touched it here and there throughout my career. But, I had this aching sense of like, we need more of this. Like there's so much data out there. There's so much that's being seen from space. We need to figure out how to bring it back down to earth and make use of it in practical purposes. I mean, it is used in practical purposes, but a lot of it's used in defense. Like the lion's share of satellite data goes to defense purposes, which is very important. But like it could also be used for humanitarian efforts and for natural catastrophe recoveries and those sorts of things.
Okay, so this is the future. This is what you want to work in. And what do you see your role in that? Like, where do you see you fitting into that bigger picture?
Yeah, this is such a tricky question because I have developed a niche as a very technical person that can dive in and work with engineering and data science and data engineering and so forth. But I'm coming to the understanding that I think one of my greatest powers is actually the fact that I've worked in all these different verticals and I've worked with scientists and civil engineers and I've worked municipal government and insurance and, a data company. And that can be really useful in and of itself to bridge the gap and to help people see at a higher level, like how you can bring these different fields together and use data from all different kinds of sources and combine it to make all of these things better. And so I'm trying to work that out right now. I'm trying to work that out. Like, I would love to stay technical. I also see how I have a lot of value in sort of helping with these higher level like strategies of like, what data can we use to solve these problems? Like, where can we look? Who should we partner with? Like, what does that look like? And how do you build that efficiently?
So when you went from being a GIS analyst to a software engineer, there was a lot of sort of bridges to cross. You had to become proficient in SQL and Python, and you had to try and fail in a lot of different things. You had to build up a lot of experience. So that was a big jump in itself. Do you see this next jump, like moving away from being that specialist, that technical specialist, to more focusing on strategy? Do you see that as being just as difficult? Or what skills do you think you might need to learn along the way to make that jump?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is where I do have a master's in policy. So I kind of have it in my back pocket. It's funny because for years I haven't talked about that at all. Like I pushed that to the very bottom of my resume. I never bring it up, because I want it to be taken seriously as a data person. But, now I'm kind of rediscovering some of that and pulling it up. And I do find it really interesting the way that many organizations are structured so that their data people and engineers are put into this little box of like, okay, you do the data and engineering, we'll tell you what to do. And all of that strategy is determined at like a much higher level of like, the direction or the product that will be built and things like that. And, I found myself working so hard to get into this box of data person and engineer. And now I'm trying to like claw my way back out of it. Like, no, I have all these ideas. Like, I'm a therapist that helps people like dig into their problems and figure out the strategy that will like help solve them. I'm trying to figure out how to do that and how to like rebuild that bridge and to be taken seriously all at the same time. It's difficult.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think moving from a technical role to a more strategic role, especially if any sort of leadership is involved, I think that's a really, really difficult jump. Obviously, not impossible by any stretch of the imagination, but most of us that are in technical roles, we're pretty comfortable there, and we've worked bloody hard to get there. And the technical stuff is changing all the time. You can feel like there's so much more to learn, there's so much more to do here, or you can feel stuck, like, I'm going to be doing this forever, this kind of stuff. And I think bridging out, like what you're doing now, I think is a difficult thing. I think it might be interesting to talk to you again in the future and figure out how you did it or what was important.
Yeah. So this might be a good time to mention that I embarked on this, what I'm calling a sabbatical. I've walked away from being employed, and I'm taking some time to do some writing and explore ideas and to work on solo analysis projects. And yeah, I'm slowly releasing these things, and I'm planning some fun things along the way too. Like, I really want at some point to finish an analysis and then do a live code review session with another data scientist or engineer to like go through and rip apart my code and find everything that like I could have done better or tighten up and things. So like I'm planning these really fun things. I'm also I've taken on organizing a conference called the Geospatial Risk Summit, which is aimed to bring together people in the risk sector from insurance and finance and supply chain and some of these different verticals and people like who are geospatial experts and in satellite industry, and to bring everybody together and to talk about how do we do this? How do we bring this data in? What does it look like? What can we learn from each other? And I think that's just such a great opportunity for me to meet people and, like meet really high level people too. Like a lot of these people that I'm working with right now have started companies. They're entrepreneurs. They're leading things. They're considered, business leaders and masters of their craft. And yeah, somehow in this journey, I'm going to figure out what I'm meant to do, or at least what the next step is. Yeah.
That's really interesting. So when I heard you talk about the live coding and these analysis projects that you're wanting to work on and probably are working on at the moment, I thought, wow, well, that's kind of holding you in that technical role. And then you come in and said, I'm organizing this conference. And I thought, this is a brilliant move, at least in my opinion. That's a brilliant way of positioning yourself to the right kind of people, I think. And also, I think it's organizing things. You don't have to know everything about the topic. You just have to organize the other people that do. And you end up at the center of a group of people that really care about this stuff, which is basically what I'm doing with this podcast. I don't know anything about your journey and most of the technical people I talk to. It's out of my realm. I have no clue what does they do. My job is just to centralize some of this knowledge, try and drag it out of them and create a repository that other people can draw on. And in that way, I become the center of a group of people that really care about this stuff. And I don't need to know everything about it. So I think this is brilliant. I really hope that works out for you.
Yeah. I was given the piece of advice by someone to build your own board of directors, like at whatever stage that you're at. You don't just have to do it when you're starting a company, and to build it not just with your friends or people who think the same as you. You don't want to create an echo chamber, but, being very strategic about your strengths and weaknesses and people that have different skill sets and different views on things, and like combining them together to make a whole that can really get at things, because no one person can do everything. You really have to, it's a group effort. You have to pull people together to accomplish big things.
It takes a village. I think that's probably a great place to round off the conversation with that piece of advice. Build your own board of directors. That's really interesting. Yeah. So thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this. I hope it's helpful for other people who are thinking about making the jump from either being a technical person to a more strategic role, or perhaps moving from being an analyst to being a developer, to writing code. I think that there's a lot to sort of dig in here and draw from. So I hope people enjoy listening to this, and people will listen to this. And where can they go? So if they want to reach out to you, if they want to get in touch with you personally, can they do that anywhere?
Yeah, I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's the best place to find me, see some of my work, see what I'm up to keep up with this conference effort, if anybody is interested in attending. Yeah, find me on LinkedIn and we'll go from there. I'll probably schedule a call with you shortly thereafter because I'm meeting people.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Daniel. This was so much fun. Thank you for having me.
I really hope you enjoyed that episode with Priscilla Cole. There will be a link to her LinkedIn profile in the show notes so you can catch up with her there. And like I mentioned in the introduction, I'll put links to other career-related episodes that I think might be helpful. Okay, that's it for me. I'll be back again soon. I hope that you'll take the time to join me then.